Hi, my name is Sophie Goggin, and you're listening to Cold Case, where I will be breaking down and looking at the murders of Jack the Ripper. Each episode is focused on what's known as his canonical five. These are the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper during his spree in London's East End in 1888. Our guest today is Nina McKim-Kite. She is a student at Falmouth Academy, and she doesn't know much about the case, but she's very interested in learning about it. So, she will be with us for our 5th episode on his 5th canonical victim, Mary Kelly. Hi, Nina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'll give you a little background into the case, as always. And also, if you have not listened to any of the previous episodes, I would suggest listening to those before you listen to this one. The Jack the Ripper murders occurred in the East End of London in 1888, and although he was only a threat to a very small section of the community in a small part of London, the crimes had a huge impact on society as a whole. Jack the Ripper's 5th victim, his last of his canonical 5, was murdered on November 9th of 1888, so about a little over a month after his most recent victim. Mary Kelly was born in 1863 in Ireland, and she moved to Wales when she was little. In 1882, her first husband, who she married in 1879, so 3 years later, he was killed in a pit explosion, and Mary went to live with her cousin in Cardiff, where she became a prostitute. In 1884, she moved to London and worked in a high-class West End brothel. But 2 years later, she ended up moving to the East End of London. In 1887, she was living at a common lodging house in Spitalfields, and there she met Joseph Barnett, and she never actually married him, but some say he was her second husband. In October of 1888, almost when she was killed, about a year after they met, Barnett left her because she used to be a prostitute, and he had an issue with it, I guess. That we don't know much about their relationship or her life before she was murdered. We don't even know if Mary Kelly was her real name, because a lot of the times prostitutes wouldn't give their real names. So we don't know. That's on record. But on November 8th, we know that she spent the afternoon with her friend, and then that night, Joseph Barnett visited her at 13 Miller's Court for what was described as a friendly visit. At 11:45, November 8th, so almost November 9th, one of her neighbors saw her returning home with a, how she described, stout, shabby, blotchy-faced man who was in his 30s. He had a mustache and a hat. She was apparently drunk, and she told her neighbor that she was going to sing, and she ended up singing a song called Only a Violet I Plucked from My Mother's Grave at around midnight.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess she was a singer? I'm not sure about that one. But around 2 a.m. on November 9th, George Hutchinson met her on Commercial Street, and she asked him for a sixpence, and he declined on account that he was spent up, meaning he didn't have any more money after the night. So she continued along the street and began talking with a man near the junction of Thrall Street, where she resided. The two then walked back along Commercial Street, and actually George Hutchinson followed along Dorset Street, which is the street next to Commercial Street, so parallel. And that's where Mary Kelly led the man into Miller's Court, where she was lodging that night. And George Hutchinson waited on the other side of the street for 45 minutes, and neither the man or Mary emerged, and so he left. He was trying to wait for her to see if she would want to come home with him.
Do anything.
Yeah.
For no money.
Yeah, but obviously she never came out of her lodging, so he left after 45 minutes. Little weird, but I guess he's a valid witness. And then around 4 a.m., several neighbors heard a faint cry of murder in the direction of Mary Kelly's room. And obviously, by the morning, everyone in the surrounding streets knew about her murder, and the cops had come. And she was dead. So back to Joseph Barnett for a minute. In his testimony, he stated that he last saw Mary Kelly alive between 7:30 and 7:45 p.m. the night of Thursday, November 8th. So he also said that he was with her for about an hour. So this could be interpreted either as he arrived at between 7:30 to 7:45 or that he left between 7:30 and 7:45. But given that he said it was the last time he had seen her alive, and that he was with her for about an hour, he probably meant that he left between 7:30 to 7:45. And a possible scenario is that he arrived at around 7, at which point one of her friends, Maria Harvey, had left her house, which would make sense in the timeline of events. And as I had mentioned, the cries of murder were heard around 4 a.m. the morning of November 9th, but apparently, cries of murder were quite a regular occurrence in the neighborhood, and it often meant just like a drunken brawl was taking place, or honestly, domestic violence was occurring. So it wasn't that odd to hear that being yelled. So no local residents wanted to get involved, and they just sort of ignored it and didn't go over, didn't check on her or anything, which, I mean, nowadays you would see that
If you heard that,
yeah,
you would be like, what
yeah,
is
you call the
happening?
cops. Yeah, it was a little bit different back then.
Like, even now, if you heard the word murder at all, you would even, like, go to check. Like,
Yeah.
Even if it could just be, like, two little boys fighting each other, like, you would still go and check. It's
Yeah.
weird that, like, no one had a thought about it.
Yeah. Yep.
Especially if there were already murders going on.
Yeah,
Like,
you would think.
They were years apart, though, right? Or were they...
Months.
Months.
So
Yeah.
August was the first victim, September had 3 victims, and then November was Mary.
So, yeah, you
So a
would
few
think,
months.
like, oh,
Yeah.
it
Maybe
could
that-
actually be a murder.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, in their defense, I guess it had been like 6 weeks since the last murder, so they probably thought he left the area.
Yeah.
We don't know why he took such a long hiatus. In the middle of his last murder was on September 30th, and this was November 9th, but I think October 16th, they got a letter, the From Hell letter it's called, where he actually sent the kidney of his last victim to the police. And obviously they did testing to make sure it was actually what they thought it was, and it was. And so it's interesting that he took time off. He sent the letter to them. He packaged the
Yeah.
body parts.
And then
He did another one.
months later.
Like the brutalest, like
Yeah.
the worst one.
He wanted to go out with a bang.
Oh, okay, Nina. At around 10:45 the next morning, Mary Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, Thomas Boyer, around to 13 Miller's Court to collect her overdue rent. As he went into Miller's Court, he banged on her door twice, and there was no answer. He obviously thought that she was inside, or she was hiding from him because she couldn't pay her rent. So he stepped around the corner and pulled aside a curtain that covered the broken window pane. Moments later, he saw, obviously, her body in her bedroom. And what he described, and this is, quote, "I knocked at the door and could not make anyone answer. I looked through the window and saw a lot of blood." So, pretty much, you
was
could
nothing
not
left to see.
You couldn't recognize her.
Yeah.
You had to. They actually, they had to check her teeth because that's like
how you can identify someone.
Yeah, dental records, just to make sure it was her. Even though people had said no, it was her. Like, she lives here.
Yeah.
You still like to confirm it, which is
Because
crazy.
who knows, maybe it was she who could have killed some other random
Yeah, you never
person.
know. So apparently the wall behind the bed was splattered with blood. On the bedside table, there was a pile of literally like bloody human flesh. And on the bed, obviously, barely recognizable, lay Mary Kelly, which is, it's unbelievable to think of. There's also pictures that they have, which obviously
Yeah.
it makes it worse, but it's bad. It was his worst kill by far. This is a quote as well from McCarthy, who was one of the neighbors. He said, "The sight we saw I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked like the work of a devil more than a man. I heard a great deal about the Whitechapel murders, but I declare to God I have never expected to see a sight such as this. The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight as this again." End quote. So you can see how, I mean, if you were actually there seeing it, it's just... Yeah, not fun. Shortly after that, Inspectors Walter Dew and Walter Beck were chatting inside the station when Thomas Boyer arrived. And this is as Dew recalled in his memoir. Quote, "The poor fellow was so frightened that for a time he was unable to utter a single intelligible word. At last he managed to stammer out something about another one, Jack the Ripper. Awful. Jack McCarthy sent me." End quote. So... as you can see, they already knew it was Jack the Ripper, even though, I mean, it made sense that it was him because he was the only serial killer in the area, and it was a woman who got killed. And so the inspectors went back to Miller's Court and obviously had to look in the window, and obviously the horror was, still in both of their minds when they wrote their memoirs years later about the events that happened. But this is a quote from what Inspector Dew saw. Quote, "As my thoughts go back to Miller's Court and what happened there, the old nausea and horror overwhelm me still. My mental picture of it remains as shockingly clear as though it were but yesterday. No savage could have been more barbaric. No wild animal could have done anything so horrifying." End quote. So, just... It's, yeah. He also said, "Mary Kelly's body lay on the bed, her head turned towards the window. Her face had been mutilated beyond recognition, and one feature in particular struck Inspector Dew. He said the poor woman's eyes, they were wide open, and they seemed to be staring right at him with a look of terror."
Of course he kept the eyes in.
Yes, of course. Of course. Joseph Barnett, who was her lover, was only able to identify her by her eyes and ears, and as I said earlier, teeth. Yeah, it's horrible. About 6 weeks after Mary Kelly's murder, there was a murder on December 20th of 1888, and her name was Rose Millette. And many thought at the time, rightfully so, that this was the Ripper again. Although, looking at the post-mortem body and inspecting it, and after further analysis, they basically said that it doesn't match the Ripper's previous kills. And now, looking back as, 125 years later, we can sort of tell that it wasn't Jack the Ripper. And there was also another victim, Alice Mackenzie, who was murdered the following summer. And people also thought at the time, oh my God, he's back. But after identifying the body and analyzing it, they realized, no, it's not. And people in the newspaper also, said, this is not, don't freak out, he's not back, basically. He's telling the press.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. So we don't know what happened to Jack the Ripper. We don't know where he went. We don't know who he was. We don't really know anything, which is what makes it so fascinating. Yeah. He sort of just disappeared after this one. He just stopped. And, detectives to this day don't know why he stopped at this one. Maybe some say, maybe he was that satisfied him, he was done. Yeah. Some people thought maybe he got arrested or he got put in an insane asylum. Some people thought he might have went back to the States, because there were a few suspects, specifically Francis Tumblety, who was a doctor from the States, who they thought it might have been him for a while. And so he actually went back to the States in November. So they thought, oh my God, he went back. Like,
Yeah.
it must be him. So they
He went
actually,
away
yeah. So they
right
had
as he
like,
went.
yeah, they had New York police like watch him for a while, but he never did anything that got him arrested. And then there was Aaron Kosminski, the one I don't know if I told you. I told someone, one of my guests,
Yeah.
about the scarf that they found DNA from like
I think
his-
it was me.
his great-great-granddaughter
Yeah.
that matches his.
Yeah, you told me about this.
So I don't know. I mean, it could have been him. It's hard to tell now. But he got put in an a sane asylum in 1890. So 2 years later. And he lived there for the rest of his life. And then another suspect was named, actually, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Like Louis Diemschutz or something. I don't know. He was the guy who found Elizabeth Stride's body. He was the one that actually almost caught the Ripper, they thought. Well, they think now.
Yeah.
Like, because he came, like, right after the murder. But some people back then thought, oh,
was
wait,
him.
maybe he was the one doing
Yeah.
it. But he actually wasn't. And there's so many other suspects that they had at the time. And that, we still research today. That we don't know. But, it's interesting.
Mhm.
But hopefully one day the case will be solved and, it'll be closed. But for
Yeah.
now, it's not. So, do you have any questions? Do you understand the case?
I understand it very well.
Are you going to watch my other episodes? Or listen to, I should say?
Yes, I will.
See, because you didn't get you only got specifically this victim.
Yeah.
So, that's that. That's all I've got. So, thank you very much for listening. And hopefully by now you've watched or listened to all of the other episodes. If you haven't, you should go do that now. And stay tuned because there might be some bloopers coming out soon that I have taken throughout all of the episodes. But thank you for listening. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Cold Case by Sophie Goggin. I hope you enjoyed.